Okay, we want to welcome all of you to the Power of Our Story. And in our segment, we talk about timeless leadership principles and some of the ideas that help us lead, whether it's a company, an entity in the community, or family, or as we often talk about in this particular conversation, the power of leading ourselves, which I think it does start there. And today I'm going to talk to you about a framework for acting on obstacles that life throws us, a framework for obstacles that life throws at us. And I think one of the primary roles of a leader is to help their teams and their individuals that report to them directly to remove obstacles that stand in the way of their success, of their goal setting, of some of the day-to-day operational things that get in the way. And I'm reading a fascinating book. I've read it once before. I'm rereading it. Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday, all about the teachings of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoic philosophy, which I'm a big fan on. And in that book, Ryan shares this quote with us: obstacles are unique to each of us, but the response is common in all of us, often involving fear, frustration, and if left unattended, paralysis. And I think that's true. I think people just stop trying when they run out of solutions for obstacles. And so I think it really is important, that we come up with an approach. And before we talk about that approach, there's one of the other voices in this space, Angela Duckworth, is a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And she's talked a lot about this idea. When you think about obstacles and pushing past resistance, of course, you're going to talk about perseverance. And she talked about, or is talking about, this idea of grit. And she defines grit as simply sticking with things over a very long period of time until you master them. And so, there's a couple of different ways as a discussion today. I want us to think about this, think about removing obstacles, maybe think about our ability to stay with things that are difficult. And we're going to talk about maybe some of the ideas and maybe even some strategies about doing that. One other thing that Angela did point out, which I thought was interesting, that at West Point, the military academy in New York, they have a summer training program for their cadets. I forget the name of it, but she's studied it in detail from a human performance perspective. And it's interesting that in her definition, in her application of this grit in a model that she's developed, what she's discovered is that actually a person's grit is a better indicator of success than IQ and physical fitness. And so if you think about that, that's a pretty compelling thought, right? If you think about going to a military academy, going through a summer training program, it's going to have a lot to do with fitness. It's going to have probably a lot to do with how smart you are. But what she discovered was it was this idea of grit. It was this idea of being able to continually go back at something that was pressing at you was going to be this single indicator, for success. And so I want you to think about, something in your life right now that you're trying to achieve, or maybe it's in your company or in your family. It can range from, I've got a 1-year-old French bulldog that does not know how to walk on a leash. Of course, that's a reflection of me, not the dog. More on that later. But I want you to think about yourself, think about a challenge that you have. And I'm not going to ask you necessarily verbalize that unless you want to verbalize that. But there's something out there. There's something that you're trying to achieve, and there's something that's in the way of you achieving it. And I want to ask you these questions, which is, the first question is, how long have you struggled with it? With my French bulldog, she's now, I think, 14 months. It was cute the first 3 or 4 months that she didn't know how to walk on a leash. My wife and I were talking about this yesterday. It's like, when are we just going to hire somebody or when are we just going to watch a couple of videos and do this? But we both work full time. We're at this stage in life where we're empty nesters, but we've never been busier, which is really interesting. We've literally never been busier with both of our careers. And we find ourselves in the weekends, we get very selfish, like we just want to decompress and have fun. And of course, training a bulldog is not like building a home on the lake where it's going to require all this an obscene amount of time. Anyway, going back to you, because this is about you, it's not about me, right? Is what are you, what have you struggled with? How long have you struggled with it? Second question is, have you applied any kind of an approach to solution? Because there is approaches, and there's always an approach to doing things, and I think half the times we think sporadically about challenges, or we think more acutely or more in an isolated way, but there actually is an approach to removing obstacles in things that we struggle with. And then lastly, who have you talked to about this particular obstacle? Are they providing insight? And so those are just some of the ideas. There are other ideas. There's a lot of steps that, there's a lot of books and articles, and I can probably list 5 or 6 more things, which are very intuitive. But I think, for the conversation here is just the idea that leadership is a lot about identifying obstacles. Obstacles are common to all of us, but they're unique because we are uniquely going through things. So maybe we feel like our obstacle itself is unique, but our response to obstacles is often the same. It's very common, which is we get frustrated easily, we get fearful that we're not going to achieve what we want, we're distracted, so on and so forth. But then if left unattended, we can give up, and that's why this idea of grit is so powerful. And developing this idea of grit, this ability to push at things consistently until they change, or even master them, which is a very powerful word. And so I guess the first part of the conversation is, when you think of this idea, how do you approach something that you feel like has been in front of you that's not going away? Is your approach to A, go seek advice, B, look for an actual process for solution? When there is something in front of you, how do you handle it? Or how would you advise somebody else handling it if you're in a position of leadership? How do you deal with obstacles?
Pragmatically.
Okay, excellent. Go. Yes. Jim's raising his eyebrows because we had a conversation about Jim last week, in optimism versus pragmatism. All right, Jim, take it from here.
I just, I would say a lot of it is analysis, right? I mean, it's really, trying to break it down into what is the obstacle, and can I break it into steps that are achievable? It's kind of like having a big goal, right? You're probably not going to achieve that big goal if you don't break it down into some task level type of thing to kind of work towards it. And that's sort of, I mean, I think that's generally my approach, whether it's making a list or, those types of things. I have lots of checklists, of like things to get done today, or, what, I mean, it's that same approach, right? Is to take some bigger problem and try to break that down. And I would say, I think that's probably a lot of, the coaching aspect too, right? I mean, that's in coaching someone, ultimately you ask, kind of what's the big dream, or, something, but okay, then how can we break this down incrementally to kind of work you towards that?
Right.
And so that's the key. And then just back to your comment about, people may have unique situations, but the approach is pretty consistent or whatever, the struggle that everybody, again, that's something I see in the coaching discussions a lot, is that, there's so much similarity in why people are stuck, not necessarily about what they're stuck about,
Correct.
but why they're stuck. There's usually common threads that you can tap into, and that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. Before I flip it to Paul, I know Paul got his hand up. My response to that, Jim, is one of the first things I'll do is I'll just sit with it. And this is such a powerful thing, but to sit with a challenge or a problem and try to not be anxious about it, but to try to really think about, what is it that I'm actually faced with right now? as a person that's crashed a motorcycle on the racetrack, and I think about going back to the racetrack, what is the obstacle in front of me? Is it the fear of crashing again? Is it the lack of belief in a skill level that was once developed? Like, you've got to really be clear on what is this thing that is in front of me. And then, to your point, once I realize what I think I see, it is so freeing to break things down into very small, manageable pieces. And I think this is something that a lot of people overlook. And it seems so intuitive, but it's intuitive to people like you and I think, that are used to helping other people do this. But boy, if things seem big to people, they're just not going to do it. I mean, in terms of, if it seems like it's too big, and that's why there's a power in doing that.
Well, that gets back to that, when you ask somebody what the problem is, right? Oftentimes the first thing that comes out is not the problem, right?
Correct.
It's
Correct.
it's that repetitive questioning of, okay, but what
Correct.
else? But what else, right? Before you
That's
really
right.
get down to like, okay, there's the problem. And so that goes to your sitting process, right?
That's right.
You're kind of asking yourself that question. I think
Yeah.
it's this, but
Yeah.
what is it potentially really?
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful. We'll come back to that too. Paul?
A couple of things. First, my challenge is distraction and how easily I can be distracted by things that don't align with my goals. One of the things that I've done to try to accommodate that is I changed my to-do list to a list called 6 things. The 6 things are my challenge for that day. If you think that you're busy because you and your wife are both working and you don't have the time that you think that you need, understand that when you retire, you spend your time wondering how you ever had time to go to work. And that's partly because of, my healthcare issues and all of that, but also partly because Mrs. Curtis has some things that she has planned for me, and they usually show up when they are urgent. And the urgency is created by delayed. And so that's one issue, and I agree completely with Jim about chunking this into things that are doable in the near term.
Yeah.
But I have goals for myself and things that I want to accomplish, and boy, they just get put on the back quickly by a knock on my door or whatever, phone calls sometimes. And I don't complain or object to it because I know that what I'm doing is helping people.
Yeah.
And so it's not always about, whether it's my a set of goals and my list of things to do as it is somebody else's. And one of the books that I put into the list is What Happens After Your Spouse Passes. And I got that day before yesterday to give to the wife of a very close friend of mine, because I think it could be helpful to her. And she's a smart lady. I mean, she can figure a lot of this out, but knowing that you're not taking that lonely path, but instead have other people who are sharing their experiences with you, is very valuable. And that's part of the basis of the power of our story is just our experiences for the benefit of others.
Mm.
So anyway, distraction is the key for me. And the other side of that coin is I'm still alive. So there's time.
Truth, well said. I would have never pegged you for a man that's easily distracted.
Yeah.
So you remind me more of a laser scope on a high-powered rifle than a distracted person, but good stuff. All right, others. I've another. I want to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, but before I do, other thoughts on this topic?
Yeah.
Yes, Michelle, jump in. You're multitasking, or you can type. Let's see if you can type and talk at the same time.
I can.
really
I was a
impressed me.
dispatcher. No, I just want to say one of the things that it seems to be a focus for me right now, and I think it's because I've been put in a situation to rebuild, but I really like to seek the advice of mentors. But in that process, I've had to rebuild my circle of mentors, which has been an amazing experience because I've got so many new people, that have joined in. But I find if I get to the point where I actually acknowledge that I'm stuck in an obstacle, I'm usually got like a wrong perspective, or I get kind of corralled into one way of thinking. And a lot of times if I run that by someone, they can just say a couple of words and it's like a light bulb and it's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way, or wow, that's a great idea. So I do tend to, when I get stuck, I like to lean on people because I feel like we learn so much from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, that's a critical subtext to not just this conversation, but many conversations. And just, I think, as I've mentioned earlier, for those of you that are watching in a recorded version of this, is, we really believe in community, and we really believe in the power of community, and whether it's growing and healing and otherwise. And so, yeah, Michelle, that's something that resonates with all of us. And that's just a part of the process of expansion and growth. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Baya.
Okay. So I will say for me, the first, I really love this topic because it's very appropriate for what I'm going through right now. It's really, thank you. I will say that I got a lot from what's been said, and I really do that. I break things down in smaller steps that are manageable. But I think for me, there's two parts also that are important: is the feeling part and the logical part, the thinking part and the feeling part, and I have to really work on both. For me, the feeling part is, yes, I can be distracted, and many times I call it more than distraction, is the procrastination. And I think for me, that part has more to do with the emotional side and the fears. And so it's important for me to identify where are my fears that are blocking me. Because I really need to transform the emotional side to the logical reasoning, and to be, I will say, to develop the mental fortitude, the mental, I will say, when you talk about the book Grit, when people go to this boot camp of Westcamp that is called Beast, it's really about waking up and going and saying, I'm just going to go that more day, and I'm going to do it one more day, and I'm going to do it one more day. I'm not focusing on the necessarily big picture, but I'm just going to stand another day and do it. So there's this part. I say another part with community that is important for me is I need two types of people that are part of my community. I want the dream boosters, but I want also the grounding people, because I need both. I need people that boost me for that are not blocking, but are for me, but on two sides, the dream booster and the grounding people, for the step by step. And also what is two other things that are important to me is I need always to stop and take the time to assess my motivation for doing things. And then also to take the time to create some space for creativity. I'm not very creative when I'm super busy, so I need to create space to be able to think.
It's great, Baya. I want to circle back to something you said and something Michelle mentioned, because I have it in my notes, and I ironically or coincidentally I put it as in my research of this topic in terms of if you were to create a process of removing something that you feel is an obstacle in life. You know, the first thing is acknowledge your emotion and your frustration. Of course, I didn't mention that on the front end, and Jim and I started the conversation. And I think this is just maybe a gender distinction, is Jim and I failed to acknowledge the emotional piece in this. And so I want to go back to that for a second, because I think it's important. Am I hearing you correctly? Is it important to acknowledge the emotion that may be attached to something that's getting in our way? Is that important? And maybe Baya can direct this toward you, because I believe you've probably studied this. Maybe I'm wrong, but you've probably studied this. Is it important to understand the emotion so that you can understand the thought that drives that emotion, and therefore you can essentially move past that? Or why is the acknowledgement of the emotion important to the process of change?
Well, for me, what I look is that when you acknowledge things, you make them, you put them in the light, and they are not as powerful as when they are hidden inside. For example, if I hide my fears, they control me. If I identify them and face them, then the power is on my side. So that's how I'm looking at it. Is if I keep them hidden, they are going to control my action. But if I bring them in the light and I expose them and I face them, you know, when they are hidden, they are this mountain that I cannot climb. When they are coming in the light and I face them, they become a speed bomb.
I love it. That was this morning's reading in John chapter 3. That's a spiritual insight for another day. Any other thoughts on that specific area? I think this is an important area, and I would even say if all of you would like, we can even take this idea and we can move it laterally into the conversation of if we were working with somebody, and let's now talk about some of the first responder type, you know, ex-military type people that we might even interact with that are really struggling with things that, and there are real obstacles. What, you know, in the beginning of the conversation, and Jim and I were very quick and very clear to go, hey, there's some steps here. Like, here's a roadmap. We can get you moving. We can get you moving. We can get you past this, because there are steps, and that's very freeing. But then there's this other component. There's this idea of, yeah, but if there are emotions that you're going to keep below the surface, they can actually control you. This is what Baya is talking about. And so I'm trying to merge those two ideas. Anybody have any thoughts that come up for them as we put those ideas together in a constructive way, or am I narrowing the conversation too much?
I think when you deal with the emotion, if you can get it from the event still occurred, but because you've separated the emotion, you react differently to it. And when you are in control of your reactions to things that occur, you're in a much better position to accomplish. And whether it's for you or for somebody else isn't the issue. Whatever it is that you're trying to do, you can do much more effectively when you've separated the emotion from the object or the issue at hand.
I think Sarah can talk about it also a lot, because the topic, I think the strength is the vulnerability. Being vulnerable is a strength. Of course, you have to have wisdom in it and with whom you are vulnerable. But I do believe that speaking up and being vulnerable on those spheres and with the right people can really help you move past it. Because usually, from the way I look at it is, most of the time those fears are connected to something else in your memory, and that's why they have so much power. And so you have to be able to, I will say, heal your memory. And the way you heal the memory is by attaching a new story to those memory. For example, it can be a memory of a failure or a situation in the past where you were in danger, or where you experienced trauma, or different situation. But the memory is stuck, and is stuck in I call the primitive brain.
Yes.
And so what you want is to move that memory to your reasoning brain, and realize what you learned from it, because you did learn a lot from it.
And what is this is a fascinating topic. This idea of moving a story from the primitive brain to the reasoning brain is fascinating, right? And I watched an 11-minute video on this very thing on healing traumas this morning. Now, it was only 11 minutes, and they didn't talk about the process of that, but maybe in a not a primitive way, but by what would be some of the ideas that would help that happen? I mean, I don't want to granulate it down to steps A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, but how do you move things from the primitive brain into the reasoning brain?
I'm going just to say in a simple way, because I want Sarah to talk, because she raised her hand, and I think it's a topic she has a lot to add. I will say you have to go back to the touchstone memory.
Okay.
And the touchstone memory is the one where you are stuck and where you come back all the time, when something remotely reminds you of it.
Okay. Sarah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting topic. It was really cool to go to the hero's journey. It was with the play Last Out. They talk about this a lot, about how storytelling really does heal the brain, and the way that you get it back, the trauma, the way that you can get it back to the area of the brain where you can reason. They talk about how you can ground and 22-0 is very much like this too. Their protocol. It's sandwiching the hard story with something positive, like grounding, and maybe a good memory. And you share that, and then you share the hard story, and then come back and share maybe the gratitude of, where you've come to, or just somehow sandwich that in. That's what I'm trying to do a lot on our platforms, is have people end with something really positive, because it does help relieve that trigger and that trauma and get it to the right part of the brain to process. So Baya has much better language for that, but so I really have been enjoying this conversation. But it is really a powerful topic. Like, there's so much that can be done in sharing our stories and being, led to do it in a certain way to heal our brains, connect with others through our storytelling, and I think free us to be able to go forward. So yeah, great topic. And then I personally appreciate too what you were talking about too, about the grit. You know, I think for me, I feel like I've been kind of a late bloomer in this, but just again to kind of ground and just keep just doing that next step. And what I have found for me, the thing that's helping me get over some humps in life is if I connect to something that I feel very passionate about, that my heart is so engaged with, usually for other people's healing, that's it kind of the thing for me personally. It helps me get over fear. And so I think that's what I've connected with for myself. And then I try to break it down in little pieces because I can get overwhelmed or distracted or all those things. But if I can connect it to something that I believe in that can be helpful for other people, I think that helps me to push past fears. So that's what came up for me in this conversation.
That's great. Yeah, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation about that, Sarah. That was what you shared is very interesting, and I've never heard of that technique of sandwiching an event. You know, I mean, what Baya just talked about. I probably read about this, but it hasn't grabbed me the way it's just grabbed me recently, that stories get stuck in the primitive brain. It's just a fascinating concept because you think my limited understanding of the reptilian brain is just strictly you're quickly reacting to what's happening ahead of you. Then you have your memory, or not ahead of you in the moment, but then you have your memory bank. And so this idea of migrating a story out of something that's just hot is an interesting topic, you know? And I appreciate where you and Baya have taken this conversation because it's moved it out of just the realm of, which is not an unimportant realm, of what happens when you have an obstacle to success or a goal. But now you're talking about a different dimension of helping people, a different dimension of helping them get freed up from things, which I know that the Power of Our Story ecosystem is really more pointed in that direction. So Baya, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going back to that fight, flight, freeze. The primitive brain is always in the fight, flight, freeze. And many times when you start retelling your story and you face the fear, you are there's some technique in EMDR that put you in a place where you react to something strongly, and slowly you get back to different stories where you reacted in the same way, and you're going to touch at some point what we call the touchstone memory, and this is where you learn to react that way. And so you can heal that because now you can get to a place where there's a learning that happened there. There's a learning happened in, oh, I learned to react that way, but I can respond now. I have the power to respond now because I see it and I know why I reacted that way. So there's something that happened in certain processes, but I do believe that it's always the story you tell yourself, and yes, you have to change the story. And we know that also about memory. Memory are not exact. The memory is the way we retell the story. It's not really what happened. And so there's so much power in our mind and the way we choose to think, or the cognitive skills are key, and but also they are always connected to emotions. So it's really important to look at both and address both.
Yeah, and I'm going to offer one more thought on this, which is a very parallel idea is, as a person that identifies as a personal and professional, performance coach and a practitioner of coaching and consulting, we talk a lot about, is there an optimal place for a client or a student to learn? And the answer to that from a neuroscience perspective is absolutely. It's, how do you engage the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive portion of the brain that does decision-making and ideation and problem solving. And what I've learned about this field of study is that the primitive brain, when it begins to heat up, it suppresses that part of your brain. And so how I'm harmonizing this entire conversation is at first I'm like, how does this connect? But it comes back to my understanding that until you deal with a person's emotional life in these areas, that could actually prevent them from learning I mean, yes, from healing, but also from learning, because
yeah.
they're in a fight or flight state, you know? So this is really an important dimension of the conversation.
It's really, if you look at it, your brain has been hijacked when you react like this, and what you need is to recreate some new pathway in your brain
Right.
that can reach the reasoning. That means a new pathway that now you have another option when you are in fearful mode. You've created a new pathway, a weak one, but the more you practice this one, the more it's going to become a stronger pathway that is more functional.
I feel a coaching session coming on with one of you two people in this area for me. This is good. This is really good. Sarah?
So let's see.